Looking for an EHR that's built for the way therapists work? From automated scheduling and billing to customizable notes and treatment plans, Simple Practice gives you everything you need right at your fingertips. Learn more at simplepractice.com.
Looking for expert speakers for your next event? Curt Widhalm and Katie Vernoy, that's me, deliver engaging workshops on clinical, legal, ethical, and business topics. Give your audience practical tools to thrive as modern therapists. Learn more at therapyreimagined.com.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhalm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our lives, the ways that we show up in and outside of our profession. And we are stepping into holiday season. We're going to talk about this as Thanksgiving. That's the week that this episode is released, but we're in general just talking more about therapists responding to family and navigating family sorts of stuff. And some of this may even be stuff that you end up talking with your clients about them being able to do with their families, because as everyone comes around the Thanksgiving table, you look around at all of your family members, the ones that you've grown up loving, and the most important question of all that needs to come up at this time is, who did you vote for?
I think if you don't know, then you already know that there's probably some differences at that table.
So family time is when all kinds of family stuff comes out. And this is kind of an episode around setting boundaries, but we wanted to talk about this in more depth than just physical boundaries, such as limiting the amount of time that you're going to spend there. All right, dinner's at 4:30. We're going to show up at 3:45 on the dot. We're going to park at the very back of the driveway so nobody can block our car in. And we are going to be out the door at 6:15 on the dot. I don't know that from experience whatsoever. I've been told that, but
it didn't seem oddly specific at all.
Did not seem oddly specific. But we're not talking just about physical boundaries, such as how do you plan your escape routes. We're talking more about the emotional boundaries, the relationship boundaries that can come up as being a therapist and coming back to the site where it all started for you, and all of your hangups and issues get put right back in front of you. So being able to navigate the holidays with your family. So Katie, I know that you come from a long and loving family that has had no issues whatsoever, ever.
Like all therapists.
Like all therapists. We only speak from an academic knowledge, and we are really talking more about, Katie, as you're thinking about what issues that you know therapists run into, what are some of the things that pop to mind as far as, oh, maybe this is where we should start?
It's interesting, the physical boundaries that you described. I was thinking that's not anything that's in my arsenal at all. I don't have that. I maybe have started to build some of that when I don't have any bandwidth. I might have to say no to certain events, that kind of stuff. But for me, the stronger challenge is the emotional boundaries, the desire, the decision to have healthy relationships with my family members. And I think by and large, that's been successful. And I recognize that there are patterns within my family of origin that reemerge when things are challenged or more stressed out for all different life reasons. And so when I hear therapists talking about it in my own experience, it goes more towards that. I described it as sacrificial helping. I'm sure that there's other folks that can hear codependency or other things that can happen where many therapists were often parentified. Their role was helping the family to stay smooth and easy. I know I've been a mediator in different, not professionally, but certainly with lots of lived experience. And so the challenge I face, and I think the challenge that I've heard a lot of therapists talk about, is this idea of how do I not therapize my loved ones? How do I not get into that role of managing the emotions of everyone in the room? And so for me, I think it's being able to stay in that space, not park my car at the very end, have a 3:45 to 6:15 hard timeline, and be fully myself and be a daughter, a sister, an auntie, those types of things that are the role that I want to play. I think it's the role that my family wants me to play. But sometimes the therapist and the parentified child come forward and try to take care of everyone. And so
Well,
I
I'm
think,
just hearing you say this as, oh, of course you're going to be the one who steps outside of all of the family drama. Of course, Katie, you're the one who just disappears when everybody needs you and your skill set most.
yes, yeah. I did not hear that guilt trip at all. But I think that's the thing is I feel very guilty if I can't use my skills to make my family members feel better. And one thing I'm working on in therapy is that I don't like that people I feel pain when other people feel pain. And yes, I hear the codependence of that. But for me, I think the biggest thing that I've been working on since I became a therapist was how can I just be responsible for myself and not for all of my family members and how they feel and how successful they are and how they navigate the world. And part of that is setting these emotional boundaries of what I engage with, what I don't engage with, how I avoid getting triangulated, how I avoid mediating, and nurture my own self-care and the relationships I want with folks and not worry about the other ones. And so maybe this is too much of a tell-all, but that is what I see with a lot of therapists is that they end up being in that role of caregiver, of mediator, and they sometimes have a difficult time getting out because now we have all these skills. We know coping skills, we have great communication skills, we have the ability to assess and diagnose, many of us. And I think it can be hard not to let those skills kind of maneuver into the space and impact how we interact and what's asked of us. I've definitely had some family members, not my immediate family, but I've had some family members who want me to solve their problems or who are asking me for expertise that's that's in the realm and I have to make sure I understand what my boundaries are. And so it's not easy being a therapist with most of us having that parentified background and not falling into being the family's therapist.
Now, I think all good action plans, as much as possible, are being able to look ahead at where the potential issues may arise. And
Yeah.
I'm choosing issues rather than problems because this is also a practice of acceptance of the
Yes.
people who are around you. And it's recognizing the kinds of boundary archetypes that might show up that, we can talk in terms of family systems about rigid families or porous families, but there are the specific ones that might end up showing up. I even started the episodes portraying, the political provocateur who's just
Yeah.
going to narrowly define some sort of argument and do their best impersonation of being able to win the argument in some sound clip sort of arguments that hopefully you can plan ahead on how you're going to not necessarily engage and be able to graciously step aside while the other person in this hypothetical argument claims some sort of moral victory.
Well, and I think there's an argument there too that if part of what is my makeup is also political provocateur, maybe that's fun, but it doesn't mean that I have to be the therapist trying to get to use all of my communication skills. I can be messy too if I want to. I think we can say what is more successful, and maybe that's what you're saying. But I also want to say what isn't being a therapist, because sometimes being a therapist is, okay, I hear you and let me understand. And this is what you're describing. And okay, everyone, let's provide space for this opinion and those types of things. And some of it's like, no, you're full of BS. and just showing up authentically. So I think that may create more of an argument, which doesn't necessarily create a happy Thanksgiving table. But I also don't think that it's our responsibility as therapists to make a happy Thanksgiving table.
And I think that depending on who you are, if you're passing this along to your client, that there's an emphasis here that you're trying to say of being able to say, all right, I'll engage. But ultimately, it's being prepared to have a hard stop and being able to say, you know what? I'm not going down this road any further.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of have the wherewithal to, withstand well, if anyone with half a brain, could respond to this and you're choosing not to, I mean, then this brings kind of into the next kind of boundary type that I think can happen, which is really just kind of questioning you as a professional if you're there, which is, well, if you can't even stand up to this, how do you stand up to helping people at all? And
Yeah. Or you're getting mad. You're a therapist. You should be able to manage your emotions.
right. And being able to have emotions is a human right that even us as therapists are allowed to have. But it's being able to disengage in a healthy way for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really the parts of recognizing where your place in control is, that it's more about being able to stay within yourself. And so if you're like Katie and you say, you know what, I'm an expert at debating and I know how to negotiate into and out of these kinds of things. So it's worthwhile for me to humor Uncle so and so about things that I fundamentally disagree with him on. Go ahead and you can call Katie at katievernoy.com and see all of her wonderful practice things. But if that even feels unsafe for you to go down that pathway, you can prepare yourself for, all right, I'm not going to engage this year. I'm not going to do it at all. I'm going to just say, hey, I know that this conversation isn't going to go anywhere productive. Count me out.
Yeah. I think that's just being healthy. I think the other piece that I want to continue to infuse is if it's not okay, you don't have to have that professional facade of I will accept you as you are, or I'm going to not engage. Like you can just say, ow, that's not okay. That hurts when you say that. I think that we don't need to mask in order to be healthy in this. In fact, it may be unhealthy to try to always take the high road. So there is a balance, and certainly you might blow things up if you don't step away. So you have to make that decision. I think for me, it's distinguishing you making that decision as a human, an authentic human, versus you trying to continue to hang on to that role of therapist. As a therapist, your time is precious, and Simple Practice helps you protect it. Their new AI-powered note taker creates structured progress notes in minutes, so you can wrap up sessions and move on with your day. Easy-to-use billing features take the hassle out of getting paid, even when insurance is involved.
Another great perk, scheduling is simple for you and your clients with unlimited automated appointment reminders. Make the most of every day with an all-in-one practice management solution that lets you focus on the work that matters most, connecting with your clients. Join over 225,000 practitioners who trust Simple Practice to keep their day running smoothly. Start today at simplepractice.com. So the next kind of boundary type that I know makes for good TV movies or bad TV movies, depending on what you want, is the overly personal interrogator. Oh, when are you going to have kids? Why are you still working in the agency rather than starting out in your private practice? Are you dating anyone serious yet? Are you going to be alone forever?
All the wonderful questions that family members think they have the right to ask.
And this might be part of the overly porous kind of boundaries that overly enmeshed families can have. But at least to me, these questions always feel like it's setting up for some kind of judgment, no matter what the answer is.
Sure.
How do you handle those?
I set boundaries. I think this is less about being a therapist and more about just wanting to maintain my own kind of distance, like this is how close you are versus this is how close somebody else is. And so I might say, I might answer seriously. I might answer humorously. I might answer with, I don't really talk about that, or, this is a party. Let's focus on other things. Whatever it is. I think there's ways to deflect. There's ways to just set a boundary. There's been times I've said things pretty dramatically because that's who I am, and cut off the conversation in very awkward ways. It works, but I don't know if I feel good about it. So I think there's a many different ways to do it. I think it's just feeling empowered to do it that is the biggest, most challenging part for most people in the world. I guess not most, but many people. We avoid conflict. We can comply when we think it's going to be easier versus saying, "Ooh, that's really personal. How about you?"
Yeah. How's that surgery coming out? Does everybody? I mean, for some people, you can feel very tempted to just kind of reciprocate back with something
Sure.
just as personal. But we can all imagine that that is the healthiest way possible to go into a family situation is just score keep and
Yeah.
try to come out as the winner.
Yes.
Or less sarcastically, I am more of a fan of just acknowledge and immediately change the topic. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a discussion for another time. We're here to do Thanksgiving, to
Yeah.
eat, to be merry around family, and not being afraid to be a broken record about that. That
Yeah.
this is part of the consistency of having some boundaries.
Well, and I think understanding where your boundaries are when it comes to professional opinions, professional work, as what role of a therapist you hold, because I oftentimes don't get those questions anymore. I think my family members, I've set enough boundaries that they don't ask questions that I don't want to share the answer to. But oftentimes they'll ask questions around, well, what do you think about my kid? Or what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And by and large, that's very appropriate at this point. I'm not getting those questions of, can you fix this? Or can you intervene? And I have had that in the past. But part of the reason that it's fine now is that I proactively had conversations about what I could and could not do. And even in specifically shifting dynamics. I can't I can't be the go-between with you and this other person. I'm learning in school, this is how long ago it was. I'm learning in school that this is why this is unhealthy, and I want to support you, I wanna support the other person, but if I'm getting in the middle, that's gonna be problematic. Or I can take a look at this thing that you got from some professional, and I can let you know what it says, I can help you translate it, but I obviously cannot be your therapist. I can't provide therapeutic advice, but I can help you find a direction of where to go. Is that okay? Is that what you're asking for? And so for me, it's proactively setting, here are my boundaries. Here are the things I can and cannot do based on my own comfort level as well as what my profession asks of me. And then I continue to reinforce those.
What I like about this is something that I came across in preparing for this episode that I had never really seen it put this way is Jade doesn't go at Thanksgiving. And
I don't know what you mean by that. What is that? What are you talking about?
so don't engage in Jade. Don't justify, don't argue, don't defend, don't explain. Don't feel compelled to just get drugged down into the normal processes that end up happening. And this works particularly well with the guilt tripping type
Mm,
things that tend to show up that after everything I've done for you, that's not necessarily, right after the turkey is carved. That's, after desserts, after several bottles of wine have been opened, or 2 days later, if you're spending extended periods of time where it's not just, getting through a couple of hours, but it's getting through a couple of days where you get to be, you get to have your own self-determination. You get to have your own pathway through life, and you don't need to internalize other people's ideas about what you have to do with your life. And this can also show up when somebody has passed away, that there's kind of family legacies that end up getting brought in. This might sound like, well, your grandmother would just absolutely roll over in her grave if she knew that this was happening. That is that going to be a productive conversation? Probably not. And you can get pulled right back into your own family of origin issues if you try to overly intellectualize and overly pacify everybody else's concerns. You're just going to end up getting ground down yourself.
Yeah.
So Jade doesn't go at Thanksgiving.
Okay. It's interesting because I think there's so many different ways that we can find ourselves at odds with family members or pulled into something uncomfortable with family members, both because of whatever our family of origin roles were and those things. It can be also our differential capacity to manage our own emotions, to communicate, that makes it difficult sometimes. I don't know if this is the same for you, but it becomes difficult sometimes to see how folks could continue to do the things that they used to do. If for everything I've done for you, or your grandmother would roll over in her grave, like those things frankly feel a bit ridiculous to me because of how ineffective they are and kind of the emotional blackmail that they provide. And so knowing that, I don't say those things, or at least I don't typically say those things. I don't think I've said those things or things like that. And so when we're engaging with somebody who has less emotional resources or emotional intelligence or even capacity to cope, it can be this unbalanced interaction where it becomes our responsibility because we're still regulated. We aren't engaging mostly. I guess there's going to be times when we do engage, but if we're not engaging, all of a sudden it's our responsibility to regulate this other person, or it could be, if we chose it, to regulate this other person because they've gotten to the place of whatever criticism or whatever guilt trip that is there. And I feel like knowing that internal boundary of when do I step forward and work to help somebody regulate, and when do I step away and say, you're on your own? I think it's one of those things that it depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the level of crisis. I know we had a similar conversation like 6 years ago in 2019, maybe it was 2018, so maybe even longer than that, with off-duty therapist. I'll link that in the show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. But when we have someone in our family who's truly in crisis, we may step forward and do more than we would do under normal circumstances. So I just want to put that caveat in there. But when a family member is dysregulated and spewing things that are harmful or hurtful, I think we do have a choice. Do I step in and help regulate the situation, or do I step away and set a boundary for myself? And I think either choice can be healthy, but it's one that therapists have to decide as family members what they're going to do with.
Need dynamic, knowledgeable speakers for your next event, training, or conference? Curt Widhalm, that's me, and Katie Vernoy, that's her, bring real-world expertise to every presentation, covering topics like supervision, private practice growth, and therapist burnout. Our workshops are interactive, insightful, and packed with actionable strategies to help modern therapists succeed.
Whether you're planning a team training or a large-scale event, Curt and I deliver high-impact learning experiences tailored to your needs. Book us today. Visit therapyreimagined.com to learn more.
I think that there's another one of these that can kind of show up, and this is kind of trying to maintain the family systems that have happened before. And I don't know, my term for this is kind of the nostalgia traveler, the one who, oh, little Katie, despite you being well into your adulthood, it's the one that's always got to kind of minimize or bring up old embarrassing stories that have no relevance to where you're at anymore, but it's kind of a usually older relatives' refusal to acknowledge your adulthood, your professionality, your hey, when's that podcast thing for you ever going to take off? Why don't you go and get a job like Becky from down the street? Kind of dismissive sorts of things. There is a lot of these that are just kind of trying to reestablish old family system sorts of
Yes.
aspects. And whether it be the nostalgia, whether it be the guilt tripping, that is to bring things back to the level of predictable discomfort that things have always been, and that we in our professional roles know doesn't exist anymore. And now I'm basically just describing family systems work,
Yeah.
but managing these ones pretty effectively can be, hey, I appreciate the memories, but anyway, in the work that I'm doing is
Mm.
it's that acknowledge and shift back to directing the conversation to something that reflects reality now, rather than being the one that everyone gets to poke fun at because something embarrassing happened to you in middle school that they're continuing to not let you live down.
It sounds like we have very different family gatherings, and maybe we have some of those things too, but I don't. Part of it is I think I have less of an older generation left, and so, I'm one of the oldest in the family members that are present, so I don't have little Katie memories, but I do think that that's true. I think that that we have to find our own way to protect ourself from revisiting or being sucked back into old patterns or into the role we used to play. I think there's so many I was gonna say booby traps. There's so many different ways that we can fall into that, and I wanna normalize that we may just fall in and have to realize it and find our way back out, and if we can be resourced enough, we can go in feeling positive and prepared, we may be able to do some of the things that you're talking about, acknowledge and shift, redirect the conversation, some of the stuff I'm talking about, setting specific boundaries, enforcing those boundaries. And I think those things can be challenging, but I think they can also be easier for us as therapists, truthfully, because it's where we live. It's what we do on a day-to-day basis. I think the final thing I want to talk about is when our skills can be helpful. I mentioned before that, sometimes people say like, "Oh, the teacher mentioned this," or "Oh, the school psychologist gave me this report. Can you take a look at it?" And being able to say, "This is what I can do and not do." And I think that's just understanding professional limitations, personal limitations you want to make and holding those true. I think there's this other element of being a therapist that comes in where I find this is the most dynamic constant assessment and reassessment that I have to do, which is I have all these skills, I have this insight, I have a lot of knowledge about the way our brain works, the way our emotions work, the way relationships work, and I'm not supposed to share that with my family members. I'm not supposed to help them with their lives. And I think for me, it's determining where is the line. I can share coping skills. I can help someone self regulate when they're having an emotional experience. I can talk them through and help them process something. There's things that we do as humans with our loved ones. And then there's also the things that we have extra skills for because we're therapists. And so when we were talking ahead of time, I came to kind of a conclusion of where I draw the line. But where do you draw the line if there are skills that you have that might help your relationships or help the people you love?
The thing that immediately pops to mind is this isn't quite a not my monkeys, not my circus situation because they
Mm.
definitely are my monkeys. But,
And it is your circus.
well, not necessarily because in my professional role, my circus is the clients that I'm working with. That
Sure. But in your life, your circus is your family
that
or your loved ones.
a lot of times where the line is really being able to call it out. Are you asking me as your son, your husband, your father, your cousin? Or are you asking me as the therapist? And really being able to clarify that those might even be conflicting roles.
Hmm.
And somebody would say, well, what's the difference in those answers? And I would say, well, as your cousin, your nephew, whatever in this situation, what I would say is, man, this family fight sure sucks. And as the therapist, I would say is, and here's where your role in this is.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm confident in being able to call it out. And I also live far enough away from my family that I don't have to engage in this as frequently as some other people do.
Yeah.
But it really is, if we have those skills, it's something to be able to recognize, hey, where do I fit in my own part of this process? Because when I'm supervising, particularly early career clinicians, when I was a teacher, when I have clinicians as part of my practice, and so many as my clientele of my practice, there's so many times where that conversation ends up coming into, yeah, this is stuff that I know, but I just get pulled into it.
Yeah.
And this is really activating those skills for yourself because, unlike therapy, you might not necessarily be responsible for many of the family members that are around you. And they're not necessarily engaging with you in a way that is approached like therapy from a client side. And so they are different skill sets. I'm a fan of calling out, hey, this is a process where I would approach this entirely different as a therapist. I'm not necessarily going to say, and here's my rate and you can pay me before I move on. I know some therapists are happy in doing that, but sometimes it's just being able to disarm the situation by being able to say, hey, how I would handle this professionally is different than how I would handle this personally.
Yeah. I like that. I think it's a little bit more structured than I find myself because it's oftentimes my interpersonal relationships. I am living close to my family. I get to see my family quite a bit, or at least parts of it quite a bit. And so it is not day to day, but certainly at least once a month or every few weeks, I'm spending time with people I deeply care about and want to help. And so determining where that line is for me isn't saying, well, this is therapist Katie hat and this is sister Katie hat or this is auntie Katie hat. It's understanding internally where that line is. And as we were talking before we hit record, I recognized that there were two pieces that were really important. One is I don't want the relationship to change. And so I am the oldest sister. I am an auntie. There's a lot of things where I do hold a position of advisor, mentor, guide for some folks that I love deeply. And so that's not going to change as long as I don't all of a sudden add the role of therapist to it. And I think the way I figured that might be is that it's still reciprocal. I'm still human. I can still share my life and I can step forward. And I know we talked in our episode about why we have difficulty being friends, that sometimes we step back and we don't share because we're so used to that one-sided relationship. And so for me, I'm not 100% great at this, but what I try to do is to be myself and step forward and share my challenges and share my thought process. And sometimes I might say, as a therapist, I might do this, and as a human in the world, I might do something else. But I don't necessarily denote that. And it's potentially not the same for every person because some folks need more support and maybe they need more of the coping strategies I can teach them, right? Or maybe they need more of the emotional regulation skills so that we can engage and have a positive conversation. But it's not something where the relationship is moving into that specific relationship that we have as a therapist. It's staying in that space of reciprocity and care and authenticity and transparency and vulnerability that I get to put into that relationship. I think if I step away from that and I don't allow my own vulnerability into it, which is both a old pattern of mine as well as something that probably happened when I first became a therapist as I was practicing those boundaries with everyone. But I think feeling embodied and being in relationship, and then using skills that I learned at school and in ongoing training and from my clients. I feel like I can do that well. And with some folks, if I listen for 2 minutes, all of a sudden they are acting like I'm their therapist and I have to set a boundary. But for other folks, I can listen consistently and then show up and they listen to me, and it doesn't feel like I'm their therapist, even though I might use some empathy skills or some communication skills or teach them coping strategies. Like, I feel like there's a difference, and part of it is me assessing the safety of the relationship as well as my capacity to set boundaries when it steps one step too far.
We would love to hear your tips, tricks, ideas. You can share them with us on our social media. You can join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this and other conversations. And if this is after the holidays, let us know what you did and how effective it was. And you can find our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy.
Over 225,000 practitioners already use Simple Practice to grow their business and simplify admin tasks that take time away from their clients. Isn't it time your EHR worked as hard as you do? Find out more at simplepractice.com.
Want expert training for your team or event? Katie and I offer engaging workshops with real-world strategies for modern therapists. Visit therapyreimagined.com to learn more and book today.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.